How you doing, Dr. Carter? Hello, fellow classmates. My name is Jamal, and this is my TED Talk. So, for my TED Talk, I'm going to go into detail on the unique experience that veterans endure on a day-to-day basis since they've been reintegrated into society. I'm going to speak about the structure of the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm also going to be discussing some of the issues that were alarming to me during this first semester that need to be addressed in the world of therapy. So, just to start off, veterans are a unique population. They've experienced situations and just, that the normal citizen isn't going to understand. And, veterans, which is why it's important that the Department of Veterans Affairs, is in place, is because veterans feel as though nobody really understands them. Nobody understands their day to day life, what they've endured, the mental diagnosis that they're currently going through, so on and so forth. And veterans, from what I've understood, is that, when they were, since the time of their deployment, a lot of them, they don't seek therapy when they're in the military. And a lot of them, unfortunately, have underlying issues that they haven't addressed yet. And if you can only imagine the diagnosis and the traumas and everything that they, that haven't been diagnosed, I should say, they haven't gotten it addressed. So when they get into the military, these disparities, these mental disparities, they heighten and they become more and more severe. And for veterans, when they are in the military, whether they're on base, wherever they are stationed, there's a reluctance to seek therapy due to the stigma that surrounds them. I mean, if you think about it, normal citizens within their family or friend groups or whatever the case may be, we're in a day and age where people are more open to getting mental health therapy. However, for that's not the case for everybody. A lot of people will look at somebody who is getting mental health therapy and say, "Oh, what's wrong with them?" Hey, should I distance myself or whatever the case may be? And it's the same for veterans, or while for servicemen who are serving at the time, wherever they're at, they have the opportunity to go seek mental health therapy. However, they don't want a stigma around them. The other servicemen that are in their platoon or whatever the case may be, they don't want to be around someone who is, not stable. And seeking out mental health therapy for a lot of these veterans means that, oh, you're not stable or whatever the case may be. I don't know if I'll trust you going on these missions or during these deployment and these high, stressful situations, So that all plays a part into it. From what I've noticed as well, whether it is, when they come back, even when they come back and they're out of that environment, there's still a reluctance to seek therapy because they feel as though normal providers they don't understand. And there's whole Department of Veterans Affairs hospitals and medical offices that obviously do cater to the veterans, and it's more so client centered. However, these veterans still feel as though, like, well, I can explain everything that I can to you, but you're just not going to get it, which is why there's a reluctance for veterans to seek out that therapy. With PTSD, depression, anxiety, being some of the top diagnoses that veterans usually are diagnosed with, adjustment disorders, sleep disorders, they're also not talked about enough. And these adjustment disorders it can be solely anxiety or solely depression, or they can coincide and be anxiety with depression. And if you would think about it, these veterans or these service members, they are, from whatever time they get deployed, they spend multiple years doing what they're doing in the military as their job or whatever their role is, and then they come back to normal civilian life and they don't know where to start. And that's a big issue. This can bring on that, again, like I previously stated, that depression, anxiety, you name it, and not to even mention the PTSD that comes into play, whatever combat situation that they were involved in, or if they saw something that was, just very tragic and just too much. Sometimes some situations and some of these veterans, they don't want to disclose what they have seen because of the traumas that could arise in the moment. And I will say, and I got these statistics from online, and I'm going to attach them at the bottom of this video. It says 50% of, it was a recent study that was done, 50% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, they disclosed that, when they got back, it was difficult for them. They didn't know where to start. Although there are services in place, whether if they want to go to school, job fairs, whatever the case may be, they didn't know where to start. They feel as though they didn't fit in. They felt as though they couldn't speak to anybody. And this brings on more mental health disparities that you can only imagine. On top of that 50%, 56% number, 96% of the sample that was taken in this study, they all yearned for post reintegration services, as far as job fairs, services just to help them readjust to civilian life. And I feel as though that's not spoken about enough, especially the adjustment disorder aspect of it. And for me, just to go into it, some of the veterans that I've spoken to, when we wrap into therapy and we wrap into the reluctance to seek therapy for veterans, one of the gentlemen that I recently got on my caseload, his role in the military was to report any unlawful actions taking place on base. He was a peer support specialist where if individuals were having suicidal ideations or mental health disparity, depression, they were experiencing any type of mental health disparity, that was his job. That was his. So hearing all of these stories, and he even disclosed to me during our psychosocial assessment that when he was about to be, released and come back to, his family, he didn't know where to start. His sergeant said, a sergeant that was really close to us said, hey, call him if anything, if he needed anything, when he does get back to society. Hey, I'm always here. You can always give me a call. And a traumatic event that, that he experienced, that specific sergeant that he thought was very up, happy, high vibrations, high energy guy, he ended up, attempting suicide, and this isn't the first person. There was multiple people that he experienced attempt, suicide, and it's very sad. Some of them, unfortunately, it carried out. Some of them were only attempts. However, it affected their health. It's very traumatic, and he was a very religious gentleman. He identified as Christian. However, he noticed that when he was over there, he would go to the chaplain for advice and different things of that nature. And the way the chaplain would operate and what he would, notice, he lost hope in his faith. And he said that he would be open to, discussing faith and religion with me. He did give me that, the opportunity and the permission to do so. This is very traumatic for him. All this in a short span of time. Again, he also disclosed that, his partner that he had been with while deployed, she ended up, speaking with somebody else and being with somebody else while he was deployed. His family, his closest cousins didn't tell him because the fear of, that affecting his mental health while being deployed. They wanted him to focus. It's all a readjustment. He had to come back to no partner, broken family ties. It was a lot for him, and this led to, drinking and so on and so forth. And, the Department of, this led to a DUI before I go on to the next point. But the Department of Veterans Affairs, luckily, being an integrated care system, they have everything that you need, whether it's housing, the Veterans Justice Outreach Program, where they help you with issues such as DUIs and things of that nature, which is very great. You name it, individual intensive outpatient programs, individual and group intensive outpatient programs. And you can go down the list. And this gentleman, he took it upon himself to seek therapy, which is why I feel as though it's important to speak about the adjustment disorders that these veterans do go through. And in that same study, 72% of veterans reported at least one significant readjustment stressor, such as marital problems, financial stress, so on and so forth, which is what the previous veteran I just, brought up was going through. However, he went through a phase where he said that, he was going to get his education And with everything going on and just feeling like he didn't have a place in normal civilian life, this led to more drinking. This led to him thinking more about, the friends that he had when he was deployed, how they, attempted suicide, and it just altered his way of thinking on life, which is why intensive outpatient programs are great. Veterans specifically, they, from what I've experienced, I don't want to speak for all of them. However, veterans, want to go throughout their way of life, without feeling though they are locked down. As far, some of them like the structure, but when they come back to civilian life, they want to have, the freedom to do as they please, which is why intensive outpatient programs are great because, compared to inpatient, because you have to stay on site. A lot of the times you can't drink or use, or you can't leave the premises, which is very stressful for a lot of veterans and individuals in general. But the intensive outpatient programs, it's more flexible. It allows for these veterans to live out their daily lives and implement coping strategies that they're learning and lessons into their day-to-day lives with their families or friends or loved ones. Like I said, these usually include individual, group, workshop therapies, and sometimes family therapy if they're in ongoing stressful situations with their loved ones. This is why it's very important for intensive outpatient programs. A lot of times they have case managers on top of the therapists that they see on a weekly basis. Most of the time it's for a couple hours a day, usually 2 to 3 hours a day. It could be 3 to 5 times a week, depending on the severity of the situation. And like we spoke about earlier in this year, integrated care systems are very critical and very important. Everything is in-house. When I go on a lot of these veterans charts and CPRS, you can see, being that everything is in-house, health information is centralized, and it provides more effective communication for each provider when they see the specific veteran, whatever veteran is in play. So when I go on a CPRS, I can see a note from the psychiatrist that they seen what happened. I can see a note from the Veterans Justice Outreach Program Director and what's going on with their case as far as that goes. Their doctor, whatever, you can go down the line. And veterans, as far as client-centered, I feel as though the Department of Veterans Affairs is great as far as being client-centered. Although, there's stipulations and care can always be better. The fact that everything is in-house so veterans don't have to go to multiple places to receive care, it's better on them. And think about, for us, how would that be? For us, we have to sometimes go to different providers. Care can be, not as accurate because you have to communicate with different providers in different locations. Everything is in-house for these veterans. I know Kaiser is similar to that. Department of Veterans Affairs, they have mental health services, individual and group therapy, main provider, PCP providers that they can go see on site. The dentist is right next door to the Department of Veterans Affairs location in Long Beach. So all of that comes into play. And my biggest thing that I want to say is that when it comes to veterans, they just want to feel as though somebody's listening to their stories. Again, with adjustment disorders, it's an alarming situation because there needs to be more although there needs to be more attention placed towards adjustment disorders because, again, I know PTSD, depression, anxiety are some of the big ones. Adjustment disorders are right there, and I feel as though it's not talked about enough. And again, that plays into substance use disorders. A lot of these veterans, I should say, who are dealing with mental health disparities, they use substances to try to cope with the traumas that they currently have gone through in the past before deployment or while they were serving in the military. Again, although you're in the service with other people who are sharing the same day-to-day lives as you, these people can be, sometimes they're not cordial. Sometimes they do things that will bring on more stresses than that's already present while serving. And I think individuals need to know that. It's not all peaches and cream for these veterans when they're deployed, whether they're in a combat zone or not. Of course, when they're in a combat zone, it's going to be worse, I would want to say. But there's still a lot of unlawful things that may happen on base that veterans can't disclose because of the stigma that may surround them. But that is my TED Talk, Dr. Carter and classmates. I've enjoyed my time at the Department of Veterans Affairs up until this point. I'm looking forward to next semester, being that I'm going to be indulging in more individual and group therapy. I'm also going to be leading a sleep disorder class, which is also a big issue. But the substance use disorder, it all plays in, it's all coinciding, because usually a lot of the times people who may drink or use other substances, they think they're getting good sleep, but they're not. They wake up hazy, headaches, may feel as though they're trying to go back to sleep, but this may lead to them using even more to to try to mitigate what they're feeling from using the substances. So I'm excited to look forward to the sleep disorder class I'm going to be leading. I'm doing assessments such as the PCL-5 that measures traumas, of course, PHQ, GAD, the BAM, you name it. And it's a learning process. It really is. Being that my uncle served in the military, in the Navy specifically, they tell me stories, but it's always different when you're in it and you're dealing directly with these veterans. So I'm really learning a lot. But again, that is my TED Talk. Dr. Carter, classmates, I hope you're having a great day. Bye-bye.